Humanity sets the agenda.
The time is just gone 8:38 a.m. as we continue with the show this morning. Now, yesterday we heard about the High Court in Pretoria that had ruled on South Africa's analog television. The switch-off date must be postponed from the end of March to the end of June. So there is an extension. And joining us on the line to discuss this issue, we're joined by Hassen Lorgat, People's Media Consortium. Brother Hassen, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome, as always, to the show.
Wa alaikum salam, and thank you for having me.
Yes, let's just try and understand this ruling by the High Court in Pretoria. What does it mean? And looking at the government and their decision that has now been postponed from the end of March to the end of June.
It's a victory for the Safe Free TV campaign and wider civil society. Admittedly, we all started late in trying to put pressure on government to extend this deadline, which was unilaterally set without contacting and consulting with ETV, Cape TV, and other independent free-to-air broadcasting organizations. And what we basically welcome is that the extension must be accompanied by a detailed program of action on the part of the minister, who will indicate how indigent and poor households can get connected onto this. So the ruling is a bit conservative in that it gave the minister a lot more favor than she's due. They say, for example, that the minister did everything in her favor. She asked people to register in terms of to the post office on or before 31st October 2021 to receive the government decoder, STB installation. They also say we are finalizing a registration application with details that will be announced in future. This is what they said in October. So the judge took for granted that all government communication has been very good. And as you know, our communications, as a person who's maybe familiar with lands, if you go to our station, it looks almost so run down. It's dark, there's no electricity there, it looks like a dangerous place. And often your letters don't reach you. So they assume that everyone got this communication in good cause. So he then says, all those who registered there must be an extension so to get this 500,000 odd households onto these boxes. Then he says that the Judge Majapelo basically says that the minister has done well, but you will not be able to do your work in time. We're saying that there are a number of people who fall outside this loop, so they must get it, plus still hundreds and thousands of other households and families. For example, most people working in the farming and agricultural and domestic labor earn at best 4,125 Rand, it is said. And they are just outside the 3,500 or 3,200 that enables you to get a STB box, right? Now, these are the working poor. When you're working for such a sum of 4,000, half the money is spent on transport, other half on food, So clearly the minister has to rethink, to open up this registration and provide support for the most poorest families who rely on television for their main source of information.
Yes, Brother Hudson, and it's clear in this particular matter that the government has got a responsibility in terms of complying with its own constitutional obligations to provide these poor households, because we're talking of huge numbers. The estimates reveal that more than 8 million South Africans will be left without free-to-air television should this the analog system be switched off.
Yeah, Inayat, you raise an issue about, they were quibbling about the numbers. But my view is that even if it was 14 million people, right? Because some of them view television very differently to what the Stats SA may have looked at it. But the stats itself have been quite elusive. In 2008, when they started this policy formally, they said there were 4.5 million people that were living in poverty, right? But at that time, the ruling itself says it did not provide STBs in any event. The 1st November 2011 cutoff was not met. So government had failed to meet its own obligations every time, but every time underestimated the number of poor people that we had. 4 years later, in 2012 statement, they say that unemployment has grown by 0.5, right, to 5 million from 4.5. Now, if you look at what has happened after COVID, the World Bank has designated South Africa as being the most unequal society in the world. And they found that location, more than age or gender, is a determinant of whether you can get out of poverty. If you're stuck in Umkuku somewhere in a very poor rural area, nothing moves there, no economy, you are the one who's likely to suffer. So if they put an action plan that will address the poorest of our people, right, provide them with the satellite and other facilities, these digital connections, providing them with support to get to modernize their TV sets and other electronic services, because for us this is linked to getting free data. We don't want only 10 gigabytes per household. We want 10 gigabytes per person in these areas, and in particular where people are digitally starved. So clearly, after COVID, more and more people are unemployed and in poverty. And simply just by ruling that these are the only people who registered, and those that did not sign on, the judge says, he almost takes a punitive look upon them that you have chosen not to reply. But if you look at this, there was always a stop-start way that the government has dealt with this. We've had 13 ministers of communication in the time since this thing started. It can't be right.
Well, certainly, because I think this is where I wanted to raise the issue about the competence of these ministers, like, for instance, the communications minister. And earlier on, we were talking about the transport minister, and we know the license debacle that is playing out at this point in time, the driver's license debacle. So, once again, huge question marks arise in terms of the appointment of some of these ministers and some of the decisions that they are taking that make absolutely no sense.
Yeah. I mean, Inayat, if you for a minute, if I delve into an area that I'm not that competent in around transport, what the ministers and others are beholden there to are powerful interest groups, right? Who could block off licensing officers or truck drivers who fight so-called foreigners, block off freeways. And we who make recommendations via documents and that are not taken seriously. But the minister seems hell-bent on deciding that she's the one who's going to turn this thing around. But in effect, the way they want to turn it around is not in favor of the people. They want to turn it around in favor of corporations. The mega winners here will be in terms of the telephone companies, or as you see from the spectrum, has been thus far Vodacom and MTN. And here it will be DSTV. So clearly what we need to do is to take time not to leave people behind, because many people feel it an entitlement, almost a right, that they've watched the weather, they get informed about major events on television, dramatically see them. COVID was a clear example where public broadcasters have done a great job in educating people about what's happening, because you've got to see it as well as listen to it. And then, of course, people have the right to recreation, listening to or watching their favorite soapies, is something that gives a lot of people, I'm sure your folks as well, your mum and others, all have something to talk about, whether it's Sivan Alan, Vango, and stuff like that. So these are things that help to build a cultural community where we can actually unite across our own backgrounds.
Yes, and I'm actually quite glad you mentioned the likes of Vodacom and the others, because it does appear as if corporate interests are paramount when these decisions are taken, but also at the same time, these are ill conceived and not even well thought decisions that are made on the part of these ministers. And we've seen this happening in the last few years over and over again. Matters are going to court, like in this particular instance where ETV, where we've seen the media monitoring Africa, we've seen all these organizations taking these matters to court. So, once again, huge question marks against these ministers, because it appears as if every decision they take has to go to court for them to basically review or overturn this decision.
Yeah, and that when government loses, they end up becoming very conservative against the judiciary, But I think at the end of the day, people have very few weapons. One is that they must organize themselves and make peaceful protests. And what we're suggesting here as well, that we want them to reopen the registration for poor families, but don't make it cumbersome. Who's a poor family. They've already indicated some criteria, people on social grants, etc. And all you need to do is to include those, the working poor. So open it up, but people must form coalitions. And we do not believe, and we don't want to necessarily criticize other people's methods, but quite clearly, governments seem to only listen to those who are destructive or those who go to court. And clearly there must be another way. And here we're hoping that the minister can actually break her commitment, her understanding, her reluctance to consult with civil society groups, her reluctance to consult with other groups, really not going through the motions. She must do that, consult with them, and we work a clear program of action how to ensure that we all move to the digital era that we all desire. But people will not be forced into it against their will or against the means that they have. They don't have the means to move there. They want to, but you need to help them.
Well, Brother Hassan, Jazakallah khairan so much for that. And as always, for your time with us here on Sana Media, we wish you all the best, inshallah. And also have yourself a wonderful Ramadan, which is basically on our doorstep. All the best to you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam, and Ramadan Mubarak to you too.
Hassen Lorgat joining us this morning, People's Media Consortium, unpacking this decision by the High Court in Pretoria, ruling that the analog television switch-off date needs to be extended from the end of March to the end of June. The time is just gone 10 minutes to 9. We come back. It's time.